I got involved with IMALS about a year and a half ago, and I'm part of a great group that was started a number of years ago for advocacy. And working with Congress, it's like trying to push bricks. I mean, it's not an easy thing, and my heart goes out to these people that do this on a full-time basis, because it is so much work and so much frustration. But the good news is that the benefits that you get out of it when you finally reach the top of the mountain are just enormous. And we reached the top of the mountain last December when Act for ALS was passed. And, after so many emails and all kinds of solicitations on and on and on and on, and thinking that you're getting nowhere. And then to have this thing just pass so quickly. We knew it was going to pass quickly in the House, but then within a very short period of time, it passed quickly in the Senate. And then we were able to watch live this event when President Biden actually signed the bill, and he gave a great speech. I know that they have speech writers, but regardless, he really did give a great speech. And he really emphasized how important this was. He really pointed out to a lot of the leaders in Act for ALS, particularly the people that started this initially. And it was just it was very moving and very inspirational. And as you can see, it really provides tremendous access for grants for this public-private partnership with the FDA and NIH. And then a tremendous amount, and this is where we're really connecting the dots to what Dr. Ostro was discussing earlier, but a tremendous amount of funding that was simply never available before for ALS. And we're really so excited. And it was just really exciting to be a part of this. Please go to the next slide. So my personal definition of advocacy is I advocate working with IMALS, but I also do a lot locally too. And I thought it would be good to talk about both. And this was also mentioned yesterday because I believe there was someone here on the panel that was able to attend that on Thursday, there was a tremendous event that was held in DC where to raise awareness for the 6,000 people who are diagnosed with ALS each year. 6,000 flags were placed there on the mall, and they had a speaker series, and they had a number of people from Congress. And I know that it was also another very moving and very inspirational and very significant event for continuing to create awareness for ALS. So, funding for ALS, it's all, and that's what Act for ALS was all about. And it's also working with IMALS with identifying local constituents that we can help to get involved in the process. And then the other thing that I got involved in, which was really exciting, is everybody knows that last year was the annual Lou Gehrig Day on June 2nd to celebrate Lou Gehrig and to celebrate what he meant and the awareness that he created initially for ALS. And Major League Baseball supported this. Every single organization, every single team, I should say, supported this event. And there were events that were held at ballparks. There were events that were held at places around ballparks. And then for a number of people that we knew could never attend this kind of an event, it was decided that they wanted to have a virtual celebration. So I volunteered to lead that. And it was really exciting. And I'm also going to be leading it again this year on June 2nd, Lou Gehrig Day. And I encourage everybody who was not able to attend a local event, please join our virtual celebration, because we want as many people as possible. So these are all things that I'm involved in on a national level with IMALS. And then on a local level, my involvement with the Als Hope Foundation, it all started when I saw a sign that talked about this walk that they were having. And that really is how I got involved. And then I told them about my vision to do a run, and they were all over it. And we started our first run for what we call the Run for Hope for ALS 5K. We started that 4 years ago. We now have the fourth one coming up on June 5th, and we're really excited about that. I'm also on the Als Hope Foundation Leadership Committee, where we plan all of the events to try to raise money. This is all about, raising money so we can help to raise funds and continue to spread awareness. I have volunteered at the local clinic here in Fort Washington. I was honored earlier this year to join the Als Hope Foundation Board of Directors, so that's pretty exciting. And of course, this is my second year participating in CRLI. So that's my presentation. Jamie, did you have anything else you wanted to also add?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. And one of the things I like to talk about is with advocacy. Sometimes I like to say advocacy, but I try to use the word empowerment. And I feel like that gives the people the opportunity to take action that they didn't realize that they might have had before. And Gary's a perfect example. Like he came and, hey, jumped right in. Like Todd found an avenue that he wanted to pursue. Gary found an avenue he wanted to pursue. And we want to make sure that we empower those I guess the avenues that you wanted to explore. You don't know what's out there until you try. And I think Allison had a great quote yesterday from that Lily Tomlin. You can't make it. Somebody, how come nobody's made that change? Well, I am that somebody to make that change. And those are the type of things that you can do. Join the board. Tell your patients, as the doctors of the clinic, tell patients join a board, or be a advisory council on the board as a PAL. Those make a difference. Join legislative actions. Start a fundraiser. Those are the things that move the needle. Besides empowerment and advocacy, I also talk about collaboration. I mean, one of the things you mentioned on June 2nd, Gary, talking to Piera, she wants to do an open house at her lab on Lou Gehrig's Day before the games start. That's fantastic. This is what we want to do. We want people to come in and educate each other about what other people are doing. We need to grow. We need to get better, and we need to learn from each other. So an opportunity like what Piera has to come in and look at her lab and talk to the researchers to see what they're doing, that's Hope educating. That's awesome. And that's what we want to do. IMALS, perfect example. They have a niche that's really leading legislative. Team Gleason, for example, assistive technology. If somebody calls us, we can go to them and say, they are the people that you want to talk to. The families want to talk to them, the caregivers, the patients. Hope Loves Company is another one. If you have kids and you're living with ALS, they have great resources. So advocacy is not so much campaign writing and joining calls. It's also collaborating, working with others, educating each other, supplying resources for each other. And so that's why I wanted to piggyback on that, Gary. And we really appreciate what you're doing. And I also think that when other patients and pals see other patients and pals, or see other people like you, Gary, or Dr. Macklin or Matt Whitman, these are all, it's inspiring. It helps us definitely know that what we're doing is making a difference, and that's what we want to do. So I didn't mean to take up your time, Gary, but I just
I wanted you to jump in, and you raised some great points. That there's just so many different ways that you can jump in and help out, and that's what I've tried to do, because obviously I'm doing a lot of different things, and it's all been a great experience for me personally, and obviously the major reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because it's been great, working with the Als Hope Foundation. You guys have been great. Really, the only drawback is the bad jokes that I have to put up with from you, but outside of that, it's been a great experience.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I could do is go on tour and do my jokes as a fundraiser, laugh at ALS, and that's my ambition. And one day, anybody that's here will have free tickets to my first show. So I just want to let you know. But no, on a serious note, we love what we do. We don't love it because it's ALS, but we're motivated and passionate to make a difference. And I'm just so glad that everybody's here. And just being here today is, part of advocacy. We're going to take something out of it and go forward. And that's great. And we're all here for each other. That's what we do. And I'm just here to hang out with Ed Beck. I'm just impressed. I always thought that Gary looked like Robert Redford, but Ed is the one that I feel is the star of the show here.
Hey,
So-
Jamie, before we close, one last thing, because I have to say this. So June 5th, 3 weeks from now, we have our 4th annual Run for Hope 5K for ALS. We are really, really pushing for support any way we can get it. So anybody here, if you want to support this thing, if you want to donate, you want to sponsor, you're on a run, walk, we'd love to have you. We're down to 3 weeks.
All right.
And
Thank
how
you,
are
everyone.
how are the teams doing, Jamie? I was just curious.
Gary, really, do we have to go through this every time? Your team is in the lead. Yes, we appreciate it. So
Okay, well, I've got to get on it with the team, the Hope team. We'll have to see what we can do about that, Gary. You can't win all the competition.
and just if anybody has any ideas, one of the advantages of being a small organization that we have, there's not a template that we have to follow. If you have an idea, or if you have a concept that you want to pursue, or if you have an ambition that you want to go after, we have that resource. We can do what we want. We can get creative. We can partner. We can collaborate. We can explore those avenues. We have already with a couple people, and we want to continue that. So if there's something in the back of your mind that you said, I think I want to do this, or I think I can make a difference with that, really, you can let any of us know, but let me know. I want to hear your voice. I want to share your voice. That's what I talk about, empowerment, and this is what we want to do. I want to work with Matt. That's who I want to work with. That guy's ready to go. So, but we're here for you.
I did stick in the chat because I have to do this. If anybody is interested in supporting the run, the information is right in the chat.
And this has been the event Gary started. And thank you so much, Gary, for bringing the run to the Als Hope Foundation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And thanks for being a part of the inner circle of Act for ALS. You really got that moving.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, very good. So these have been some ways people have gotten involved. There's lots of ways, and we'll, the next session after Rick is really talking about how people are thinking about things. So Rick, would you like to talk about how to get started?
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, this has been a terrific session. And this is just a few more things in my presentation that you can do next with all the tools that you now have as research ambassadors. So one of these things is what I talked about yesterday. That's the Peace Committee. So this is a subcommittee within the Northeast ALS Consortium. And you can see our mission is to utilize education and advocacy to empower people living with ALS and their families to have a greater understanding of and a greater role in clinical research. And we do this through monthly teleconferences in which we have different stakeholders, patient advocacy groups, sponsors, researchers come and present projects that are in need of input from people living with this disease. And so we've got some meetings coming up. The next one is on May 23rd. Following one is on June 27th, and then July 25th. And you can see there the people in charge, Allison and Nadia, those are their emails. All the research ambassadors are automatically invited to this. If for some reason you don't get an invitation in the next week or so, just reach out to Allison and Nadia and they'll make sure that your name and email are included. There's really an infinite number of directions that you can take your passion and your training. As I mentioned yesterday, there's so many places that people have gone who graduated from this program that I never envisioned. They went on and started the Ice Bucket Challenge. They got Act for ALS passed. They worked with the FDA to at least get some ALS drug development guidelines in place. They helped us to get rid of the delay and getting Social Security benefits. There's lots of podcasts and websites and patient advisory boards that they put together. So, I mean, don't be afraid to try things. Find something here in this disease that motivates you, some area that you think you can make a difference on, and then just try things. I mean, give you an example of something that I did a few years ago that was still one of the most fun ALS advocacy projects. Most of you know that I like crazy clothes. I found that ever since I was a kid, I could put on a crazy outfit and it would be like a suit of armor for me. It would help me to maintain my positivity throughout the day, no matter what I ran into. And I also found that it had a positive effect on people around me, that it would make them smile and laugh instead of wanting to beat me up when I went to school. And I've just found that it's a great tool in ALS. I mean, when I go to ALS clinic and I have to see 10 or 12 patients, that last patient needs me to be just as energetic and positive as the first patient did. And I find that the clothes help me. And I know the clinic can be scary. As I said yesterday, we've got a lot of people making a lot of measurements, and sometimes the measurements are worse and we have to have tough conversations. And if we can break the ice by laughing together at something that I'm wearing, I think it's a great place to start. And so the project that I have pictured here is one of the last remaining things on my bucket list, which was to get a custom made suit. I wanted to have one custom made suit in my life. And I thought for years about what this would be and who would do it. And I decided to create a suit that was embroidered with symbols of lessons I've learned from people with ALS. 21 years, 3,500 patients that I've taken care of. And so on this suit, on the pant leg, instead of a tuxedo stripe, you can see a motor neuron. I never understood how important that tiny part of our body was to our quality of life. On the sleeve is a staff of Asclepius, which is a Greek symbol for healing. I can't fix the disease yet. I've learned that I can heal people in a lot of different ways, including treating their symptoms and improving their quality of life. Down here in the lower front panel is a blue cornflower. These flowers, when you see them in real life, they look really fragile, but they're incredibly tough. They can maintain their beautiful blue color even through the harshest winter. And I've just found that about so many of the patients that I've taken care of. When you first give them the diagnosis, you worry that this is going to break them. And although it often makes them weaker on the outside, I found that it can't touch the most important parts of people. People can maintain the best parts of them all the way through this disease. And you've all chimed in and given us examples of how you're doing that. Up on the top of the shoulder there, you see a swallow. Early in my career, you know, as I said earlier, I didn't have a mentor. I was just focusing on the science of ALS. What do I need to measure? What am I supposed to do with these measurements? What are the options? How do I present them to people? And then I met a young guy in his early 20s with ALS, and he had this whole army of people that he came in with. He called them his often awesome army. And these were some of the wildest looking people I've ever seen, mohawks and piercings, and they were covered in tattoos. And one tattoo that they all had was a black swallow. In fact, the patient had a whole sleeve of them. And I finally got to asking him one day about all these tattoos, and he had familial ALS, and he told me, you know, he didn't really know his mom, but when she died, when he was real little, she left him a book. And on that book, on every page, she had drawn one black swallow. And he didn't know why, but when he got to be old enough to get a tattoo, he got all the swallows tattooed on his arm. And then when he started getting sick with ALS, everyone he knew got one of those swallows tattooed on their body. And what they were going to do is they were going to keep this positive and hopeful. And I'll be darned if they did. I mean, every time they came in, they had these amazing, funny stories and all these hopeful questions, and they just buoyed him through the disease. And they taught me the power of hope. And so I've got one of the black swallows from his arm on my wrist, and I also have it on my jacket now. And finally, on the back is a UFO, which is actually from the X-Files. It's from the symbol over Fox Mulder's desk. It's the importance of thinking outside the box. You know, I didn't start my ALS career knowing that I would spend just about every day of my life reviewing some unusual treatment that's listed on the internet, or trying to find records on someone who reportedly recovered from ALS. But it needs to happen. And in fact, those reviews have taught me so much. I mean, I've just learned so many lessons about these unusual treatments, including that some of them might actually work. And, you know, in pursuing some of these myths and rumors about people who recovered from ALS, I've learned that it actually can happen. I now have 56 sets of records on my desk of people who meet today's criteria for ALS, progressed to where they were disabled, and then objectively recovered most or all of their lost motor function. And I still don't know why these happen, but I'm studying the heck out of them and trying to figure it out so that I can someday make it happen more often. And every time I wear this suit, people come up to me and they ask about it, and I get to tell these stories, and I get to teach them a little bit about ALS. And maybe somebody's going to go home and make a donation. Maybe some youngster who comes up and asks me about the suit gets motivated to go home and go into this field, and maybe that's the person that cures the disease. So don't be afraid to try things. And again, I mentioned this yesterday, but it's so important. You're going to get the keys to something on the NEALS website, which is called our outreach counter or tracker. And if you don't already have the instructions in the materials that you got for this CRLI, reach out to Carly at NEALS at that email or that phone number, so you can get the keys and you can start keeping track of all the amazing things that you're doing and will do as research ambassadors. And this is going to become even more important now that the pandemic is receding, and we're going to start having CRLIs in person again, because as I mentioned yesterday, these can be quite expensive. It'll probably cost us $30,000 to $40,000 to do this in Clearwater in the fall. And although we have some money for this next one in the fall, already next year, I know we're going to have to fundraise, and anybody that we ask for money is going to ask us for some sort of simple evidence that this program is working. And so this table is very helpful. And so I'm just going to check the chat here and see if there's any questions that came in. So Allison just mentioned that the agenda for the next Peace Committee meeting is set. We're going to hear from some sponsors, CoreStem, MT Pharma. We're going to hear from ALS Association, and we're going to hear from the NIH strategy team. And then Jamie just mentioned he considers it a privilege and an honor to work with people with ALS, and I would say the same thing. And then Candy asked, so in terms of thinking outside the box, aren't the majority of your reversal studies due to functional medicine? What is my opinion about that? So Candy, what I would say is, I don't know why these people got better. I wouldn't say the majority of them engaged in functional medicine. In fact, I would say the majority of them didn't engage in functional medicine. Some of them didn't appear to do anything, even take Riluzole or go to a clinic, and they just got better. So at this point, I don't know what made these people better. I'm studying their genetics, their RNA, their protein biomarkers, their microbiome. I'm doing small pilot trials on some of the unusual things that they took, but so far I haven't been able to figure it out. Hopefully I will in the next few years. And so,
if I may ask a question real fast, instead of typing it, through your studying these reversals, do you look at the effect that heavy metals, or do you run those kinds of tests that a lot of functional docs do? Heavy metals, mycotoxins, you know, these kinds of things. Do you see any correlation there?
So I don't run those tests, and here's why. I think if you're going to test people for something, there needs to be a plausible connection to ALS. And right now, today, I've not seen any evidence that any heavy metal causes ALS, nor that any fungus causes ALS. And, you know, as far as functional medicine, I love thinking outside the box. I think when you have a disease where you don't have an answer, it makes tons of sense to think outside the box. But I'm also a trained scientist. I think there ought to be a good rationale between anything that you're measuring and what you're going to do with those results. And that's where I kind of lose it with a lot of functional medicine docs. I feel like a lot of them order tests that don't make much sense to me. They use labs that in many cases are not accredited labs. So I don't even know about the accuracy of what they measure. And then they use those results to develop treatment plans. And so, you know, for me, I'm certainly willing to think outside the box, but there's got to be some science behind what we're doing. So as I mentioned to T yesterday, I have a family commitment this afternoon, so I have to sign off during lunch, but I did want to say it's been a fantastic CRLI. Again, I've done 21 of these, and I can't remember a more intelligent, passionate group of folks, fantastic comments, great discussions. I just want to leave you with my favorite quote, which I think applies to all of you, from Margaret Mead. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can work together to make a difference. In fact, that's really the only thing that ever does." Thank you so much for being that small group of people who are going to be research ambassadors. And I'm so looking forward to making a difference with you.
Before you leave, Rick, Gary had his hand raised. I don't know if he has a question really quick.
Sure.
I'll make it very quick. So we know that what we've been told is that people that were in the military were 3 times as likely to get ALS. And I know that that's a very generalized concept. Is there anything specific that anybody has been able to narrow that down to?
Yeah, but it's about a doubling of risk, Gary. And again, it's interesting because it doesn't seem to matter much when or where you served. And there's one particular group that went to the first Persian Gulf campaign under the first George Bush, who came back even more likely to get ALS. But that doubling of risk seems to be true of all military veterans, no matter when or where they served, whether they were deployed or not deployed. There's not a huge difference between the different branches or the different specific jobs. And so it's really hard to think about what exposure there could be across all those different, eras, conflicts, jobs. I have 2 theories myself, but they're really difficult to prove. The first theory is physical fitness. There are some studies that suggest that physical fitness is a risk factor for getting ALS, that there's about a doubling of risk for people that ever played a varsity sport at any level compared to people who never played a varsity sport. And I think if you look back over the history of military veterans compared to others from their same generation, they are, more likely to be athletic, especially back when we had a draft. Because back then, if you were in bad shape, you didn't even get into the military. The other is having been employed by the VA Medical Center for 26 years, having talked to thousands of veterans, one of the things they tell me is when you go into the military, you go down a line and you get a whole bunch of immunizations over a very short period of time. And that's across all conflicts, no matter when or where you serve, whether you're deployed or not deployed. In basic training, you just get a whole bunch of immunizations over a short period of time. And I just wonder if you have other risk factors, if you have genetic susceptibility or been exposed to toxins, if that can be the final straw for people getting all those immunizations over a short period of time. It's really difficult to study because I don't know of another group that gets that many immunizations over a short period of time, but that's what I know about it.
I made an assumption, I've always made an assumption that maybe exposure to certain types of chemicals, being in the military, that could be a factor. I know my dad was in World War II and he was as healthy as you could be. And then at 77, all of a sudden he gets ALS, but he was in the military. And I know that in the military, you do get exposed to an awful lot of chemicals.
I've heard, I don't know the validity, but I have heard theories about the burn pits because anything is torched and, you breathe that in. I've also heard possibly there's an insecticide that they put in uniforms that weren't tested in high heat areas. Maybe it's that, they do think it's toxins. I think pilots actually have a higher incidence than others. There was like 4 or 5 people in one pilot squadron that all had ALS. So yeah, it's tough to figure it out. I've just heard different theories, but.
Joe, you had a question?
Yes, I did. I was very fortunate enough to get a Christmas tour of the White House in December of 2020. Spending 27 years in law enforcement, I had a colleague who was a Secret Service uniform division officer at the White House. And as soon as he heard I had ALS, it takes sometimes 2 years to get a tour of the White House for the Christmas tour. And when he heard that I had ALS, he invited me within I think 2 months prior to the tour. But one of the reasons is there was an abnormal case of 3 uniformed Secret Service officers in their uniform division at the same time within the White House that had ALS.
Ooh.
And I think they did extensive research and tried to see if it was within the environmental conditions or the air quality, just to find out. But it was just an abnormal type of situation where it's not a big force within the Secret Service Uniform Division, and they all worked at the White House, and 3 of them pretty much within the same time frame had ALS. So I just wanted to share that. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, you do hear about these clusters. I mean, we just heard about a cluster up in Massachusetts at a courthouse. You hear about these clusters, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but I understand this kind of research is very difficult to do, trying to figure out what might be in the environment, for a cluster. And, it sounds simple, like, well, you just test for things, but it probably, there's a lot more to it than that. It probably isn't just the presence or absence of an exposure to one thing. It's probably what was the dose, what was the duration of the exposure, at what point in the course of someone's life, what other things do we know about those people? Because I mean, not all military veterans get ALS, not everybody that worked in the courthouse in Massachusetts got ALS. So it's complicated. There's a lot of things. I heard a talk on this a few years ago, and the researcher talked about it as the expososome. Trying to figure out how to do research that takes into account all those different things. And Lyle probably knows more about this than I do, but this is the type of research that generates what's called big data. There's so much data that comes out of this that you almost need like artificial intelligence to help you figure out all the possible interactions between whole genome sequencing results and these kinds of expososome results. So.
Make a couple comments. So one is, obviously there's a lot of this that we don't know and we don't understand. One thing I'm excited for this year, and maybe it's something that we need to be making researchers more aware of. This is the first year that the CDC ALS registry has had a pilot grant program. So they've always had this grant funding program for ALS risk and this sort of epi work. But this is the first year they've added a mechanism that's basically a mechanism for novel new ideas that don't require preliminary data, sort of what I was talking about in our DoD program, but specifically to investigate this kind of stuff. So ALS risk factor related research, but new ideas, smaller grants. So I think it's something that we need to make the community aware of. The thing about these clusters, I always worry, so first off, interesting, and I'm kind of glad Eric's here because maybe you can answer this question that freaks me out. So yeah, there's this higher rate in militaries, right? 2 to 1. Weird thing is that if you look at the percentage of ALS cases that are C9 in military, it's the same, right? So the same percentage of ALS in the military or not in the military are C9 positive. And so doesn't that mean that if you have a C9 mutation, you're more likely to enroll in the military? And I'm sort of being flippant, and before you answer that, but the reason I'm mentioning it is there is a fair amount of data that might suggest, we are a combination of our environment and our genetics, right? And so it may be that there is a genetic predisposition that makes somebody more athletic or more likely to pursue certain jobs in their life. And that same predisposition might make their risk of developing ALS greater. And the example I always think about for that is the soccer players in Italy, right? So there was this thing where everybody thought, so the high rate of soccer players in Italy, and and everyone's like, oh, it must be some toxin in the grass. But then they're like, well, hang on, like other sports play on these fields. And so it's not that because the rugby players don't get it or whatever. And then they said, but maybe it's head injury or head trauma. And they're like, well, no, because like the football players, they're not getting it. And then there was this theory that it was an ascertainment bias because there's too many ALS doctors in Italy. And so if you were in Italy, you were more likely to get diagnosed with ALS. And if you were a professional soccer player that went home to your other country that maybe didn't know what ALS was, you didn't get diagnosed. That didn't hold up. And then somebody looked a little deeper, and I don't remember the details, but it wasn't actually soccer players. It was like a specific position on the soccer field, like, I don't know, center mids. It wasn't center mids, but I don't remember what it was. And that was weird. And then somebody said, if you're a center mid and you play professional soccer and you live in Italy, you've been playing soccer since you were 3. And at some point when you were 6, somebody ran you through a bunch of tests and said, you're a goalie, you're a defender, you're a center mid, right? And that had to have a lot to do with your genetics and your, who you were. And so maybe it really is in some of these instances when we hear about military and athletes, maybe it's that there's a genetic predisposition that makes somebody good at those things. and also might increase their ALS risk. And so we have to figure this out. But Eric, can you answer like this? It freaks me out, the C9 thing, because isn't that what that means?
It would, I mean, so you've mentioned a number of things that seem like plausible alternative explanations besides that military exposure is a cause of ALS. Ascertainment bias, I don't know. I'd be interested to know from the clinicians whether you think that 100% of ALS patients are diagnosed, or is there a potential that being in the military and the greater access to medical care might increase the rate at which we're ascertaining ALS diagnosis? I don't know. That may not be a possibility.
But straightforward.
Think,
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, genetic causes can be very strong. There's plenty of twin studies where twins are put up for adoption or end up somehow in separate houses, have no connection to their congenital twin, and they end up, you know, there's sort of these classic examples where they both name their son James Allen, you know, or they both, you know, went into careers in exactly the same, you know, direction. So I think there are, you know, what are called pleiotropic effects of genetic backgrounds that where could be a linkage between these various traits that we think that we see associated with ALS that are not the causes, but are just genetic linkages. So I don't know. Do we have an estimate of the heritability of ALS that's separate from our known C9 SOD1?
Yeah, 10%. I mean, roughly 10%, we think, right?
But you think there are some genes that are still not identified?
Well,
I would think that there are probably, or maybe a combination.
Oh
of,
yeah, but I mean, 10% is has a family history, we think.
Right. So separate from the family history, what's the heritability apart from that?
I think it's probably all the background, your background genetics are going to determine what you get. And so that there are probably a lot of background genes that predispose or make you more susceptible to motor neuron degeneration with a trigger. So, you know, what that trigger is. But I think what Lyle's asking is, you know, why is the incidence of C9 greater in?
It's twice as much, or not twice as much, but if ALS is twice as likely in the military, and the same percentage of those are C9 anyway. But one last very important point I think to make. So we always hear about these toxic exposures and burn pits, and you know, the real answer is we don't know. But the other thing you have to realize, so generally in biology, if you have an exposure to something that causes something in your body, if you then remove that exposure, it doesn't progress, right? It's sort of like the damage is done. If you burn down the forest, the trees are gone. Maybe they grow back, maybe they don't, but you shouldn't have a progressive biological perturbation once you remove the toxic exposure. And it's something we don't quite understand. And a parallel with that, so recently there's been a lot of publicity for these studies about looking in teeth, right? For metal levels in teeth and baby teeth in particular, and saying, oh, it's in utero exposure of you know, and we can detect these metals. But what's really come out of those studies, because it's hard to imagine how exposure as a baby is going to cause a progressive disease later in life. However, the hypothesis is that the reason those metals accumulated in those specific people was that their bodies didn't handle metals right. It wasn't that they had a higher exposure to it. It's that something about them, their cells just didn't handle metal right. And maybe their cells don't handle other things in the environment right when they're older, right? And, you know, toxic exposures are also hard to do in ALS patients for other reasons. Our expososome, Rick was talking about the expososome, it's what we breathe in and what we're exposed to, right? Well, as ALS progresses, that actually changes, because if you become less mobile, you're not leaving your house, okay? And so, you know, if you live somewhere that has a high level of something outside, well, as your disease progresses, you're inside more. As your disease progresses, you're not actually exchanging as much air with, you know, with every breath, right? And so there's a lot of interesting, very early research on how those kinds of things might change the levels of chemicals that people are exposed to, either through breathing or through, you know, the highway that lives near your house, or, you know, working in your building. And what I mentioned before, and somebody asked me to mention it again. So the CDC, the National ALS Registry, has a grant funding mechanism. This was the first year where it used to just fund very large grants, and they tended to go to the same few researchers who had these big programs. But this is the first year they added a pilot program to fund these sorts of more kind of, you know, innovative ideas.
But also there could be causes of ALS, but a trigger that kicks it in.
Don't know.
So, yeah, I mean, well, actually that was a question. That wasn't me. I was wondering because that's that would make a lot of sense. I don't know.
Maybe not, because
Yeah.
if it triggers something, it suggests that something has changed in all the cells in your body that wasn't changed before. And biology is all about probabilities, right? And so the weird thing about ALS or any neurodegenerative disease is, aside from the ones that Rick has identified, these reversals, if you have it, it's your thing, right? It's not like you got pneumonia and you got better from it, or you cut your arm and it healed, or you had like some kidney failure that you recovered from. There's something profound in this idea that if you develop ALS, with the exception of these cases that Rick has studied, that is going to progress in you. And so progression and spreading in your body implies that there's some process that is continuing and ongoing. And it's really hard on a just basic physics and basic chemistry and basic math modeling way to figure out how a set in time single exposure can necessarily do that. It doesn't mean it's not true. It's just, it's not generally the way that toxic exposures work in medicine.
The problem is, though, I mean, we're so far afield. If I have a genetic endowment, there'll be susceptibilities, and in the right milieu, it may
That's the
turn
answer.
on that process. It's like dominoes, and I hit that domino, and it all falls down. And that susceptibility may get worse as we age. I mean, Amar Al-Chalabi and that group, that whole paradigm of, I have a genetic endowment, I have time and age, and neurons over time, deteriorate, and then in the right setting, there's an insult. We don't know, and it's so hard to study because everybody's genome is so different. So to look at those genetic and environmental interactions. I mean, there's also the story about selenium in the water in Italy. I mean, it's very,
Unrelated to this specific topic, I told Allison a couple of weeks ago, I really would love it. We should figure out a way to have like a virtual happy hour where we just babble about whatever we want. Whoever wants to show up, shows up. If you can show up, fine. I mean, I know lots, I mean, not all the time, but it's fun to talk about this stuff with people from different backgrounds and with, people with ALS and physicians and scientists. And, Zoom's easy now. Somebody should just set up like the ALS Babel happy hour once every whatever, and whoever wants to join.
I would like to
There's
say
something
something
that
about,
advocates-
I think, Lyle, as much as I enjoy talking about these things, I think that all of these are great ideas. What we need to do, because we need the answers, is to start doing the experiments.
Oh, of course.
Which now is
Yeah.
absolutely possible, I think, in particular with involvement of patients. So because any hypothesis is a good hypothesis, and so I think it is incumbent on all of us to start, testing these hypotheses in a systematic way and get to the answer as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And as Terry was saying, Amar Al-Chalabi and the military are a very good example. Amar Al-Chalabi has this genetic endowment idea, and it stems really from the higher rate of ALS in the military, because think about it, he's absolutely right. People who serve in the military tend to do it. If the father did, the children do also. So could it be that there is really a susceptibility gene, not perhaps a causative gene, that runs in the family, and therefore, whatever the exposure is, then this is what is really, the starting is really the genetic endowment. And I think that now is an experiment that is possible to do.
Well, I had an experiment that was not funded, although I got 23rd, I think it was 20th percentile, which was, using a model of ALS, a mouse model of ALS, the SOD1 model with only 4 transgenes, Piera. And this model is interesting because not all the animals get sick, only sometimes get sick, but they all get motor neuron loss. So to some extent, and the idea was to use an exposure, which in this case, that's why I know about selenium, was selenium, and see if exposure to selenium would increase the percentage of animals that actually develop disease, which would be a way to look at that gene and toxic exposure in a clean way. There's no way to look at these in a human population, there's such diversity in the genome. It's going to be very hard to get a controlled situation, but in animals, you can create that. And so, but we're off target.
And you were at Target ALS last week, Terry,
Yeah.
but another thing that perhaps we should really think about doing again, and these are doable experiments, is rather than looking at the negative genetic endowment, right? Why don't we look at resilience? There are a lot of people in the same family, perhaps in the military, that do not, even though they get exposed or even though they are in the same family, they do not get, and they lived in the same environment all their life, they do not develop ALS. What are those resilient genes? And your experiments in the mice will all point out to that. Perhaps we are better off looking at the positive and then deliver the positive to those who have ALS.
It's
That's
really
what they
good.
did in HIV, right? Long-term non-converters, right? Who don't get AIDS. You know, they talk about this a lot in brain injuries. So there's boxers who get punched in the head their whole life and don't get, you know, CTE from it, right? Why doesn't a woodpecker get traumatic brain, you know, injury from going blah, blah, blah against the tree all day long of his life? I mean, I think that's a parallel to what Rick is doing with you know, these reversals or these people who plateau and don't respond. Like, what's different about them? We need to figure it out. What's different about people who have, but Rick, to your question about the genetics, I mean, I think the majority of the pathogenic mutations, we think the penetrance is pretty high. You know, if I think, right? I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it is, but not 100% though, Lau. That's what fascinates me.
Yeah,
I mean, even
sure.
C9, there's people, you know, that are identified in databases with huge repeats that are 70 years old, never got ALS.
Well,
So what's different about
you
them?
know, biology is stochastic. Like, if we all live to be 160, would we all get ALS, right? I mean, are we all at risk of it at any time? Who knows? But yeah, studying the people who don't get something and who do not progress is clearly, yeah, who's going to fund it? Let's do it.